Hi all, Dr. Clark. This is Natural Resource Lecture Series. Okay? And today we're going to talk about the principles of science and systems. And really what we're going to discuss this first piece is how do scientists conduct research? What does it mean to be a scientist or do scientific research? Okay, and then kind of what the approaches are and what the misconceptions are when it comes to scientific research. Okay. Before we get into kind of nuts and bolts and some definitions and some examples and things like that, I first just want to put a little, maybe not a plug, but another couple books that if you're going into the field of ecology, if you're going into the field of wildlife management, forestry management, rangeland management, environmental science, something along those lines. These books, I assure you, you'll probably actually have to read them at some point, okay, especially this one, How to Do Ecology. Okay, it's an excellent little reader that gives you an examples of how to design an experiment, okay, how to collect data on that experiment, how to be unbiased, and collect the best data possible and get the best results. And whether the results are what you would expect or not, it doesn't really matter in science. Okay, it's what is the actual results? What are the facts? That's what scientists are after, not proving themselves right or wrong or proving someone else wrong. Okay, that's not what science is about. Science is about discovering the unknown and then conveying that discovery to the general public. The first part we're pretty good at. Okay? That's discovering the unknown. Well, scientists every day make new discoveries. I mean, elite, amazing discoveries. But getting that conveyed to the general public, that's a difficult point. And it's a kind of a difficult setup. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so how to do ecology. I'll put the link below. Okay, and the second one is one of my favorite authors, and it's kind of a funny book. And John Genovi Jr. writes lots and lots of biology books, but they're biology books that are for the general public. He writes books on parasites, he writes books on ecology, he writes books on all kinds of things, but they have a lot of humor and they have a lot of art in them, and they're really geared so individuals can learn a little biology, but also, not be bored. Okay, and so John Genovi's 10-Minute Ecologist, an excellent read. Really, there's about 20 or so answered questions in this book, and so questions like, let's pick one real quick. So, what good is a swamp? Okay, and so he goes through the reasonings why we shouldn't drain swamps. Okay, what their benefit is to an ecosystem, and wetlands, same thing, little ponds, same thing. What benefit do they have to the ecosystem, and why it's a huge deal when one is drained. Okay, I highly suggest this book. It's an excellent book, and it'll give you ideas if you're going into the field of different jobs that one can do, okay, and whatnot. Okay, so the 10-Minute Ecologist, again, I'll put the links below. All right, so jumping into the principles of science. So again, like I said before, science and scientists are not conducting research, or they should not be conducting research. I'm not saying that some don't, but they should not be conducting research to prove someone wrong. Okay? That's not how science works. Okay? Science is really the basis and the principle of science is to discover the unknown. Now, in discovering the unknown, are you going to prove people wrong? Absolutely, and you'll see some examples of that throughout this kind of lecture series. But nonetheless, that's not the overall goal. The overall goal is to provide evidence or support for a hypothesis. Okay? And a hypothesis is an observation of a natural phenomena. Okay, so we'll jump into it and hopefully clear up some concerns and questions that you might have in regards to science in general. Okay? So what is science? Science is a lot of things, but first it's kind of a process by which people go about to produce knowledge, okay? Or to produce some kind of logic. Okay? And so a very simple process. So again, if I drop this pencil, most of you would be like, okay, that process or that theory is gravity. That's what took place. That's why the pencil fell to the ground, and it was science that kind of gave us the process. Gravity has always been here. We just didn't know much about it until individuals like Isaac Newton and Robert Hooke are individuals that wrote significantly and figured out mathematically and methodologically how gravity works. Okay, so science is really about discovering the unknown. It's not about creating, okay, although many things get created in science, but it's about discovering what we don't know. Okay. Second piece, okay, is really part of the scientific method, and that would be to test or develop hypotheses or explanations for natural phenomena. So first starts with kind of an observation. So you see something in nature, okay? And then you create a hypothesis, which is not an educated guess. Okay? It's not a question. Okay? It's an explanation for a natural phenomenon, and that explanation has to be testable. Okay? And we'll come back to hypotheses in a second. Okay? The other thing that science has and will always have is this large cumulative body of knowledge. Okay? And so, but that being said, the reason why a lot of modern science papers and modern science has many authors is because science is very difficult to do alone. Okay? Now there are lots of individuals that would say, well, Newton worked alone, Einstein worked alone, okay? Darwin worked alone. No, this is not the case. They didn't work alone. Okay? They might have published alone, okay? But they shot their ideas off of lots and lots of people, okay? And eventually they might have had a breakthrough and created a hypothesis that was an excellent explanation for some phenomena, okay? But it was built on a bunch of other phenomena and explanations that were already known, okay? Or in the works. Okay? We'll talk a lot more about how those processes go. Okay? But probably the best thing that science got going for us, and the reason why I feel it's so important and so many other scientists feel it's so important, is that it helps us explain what's going on in the world, helps us explain the natural world, helps us explain our physiology, another organism's physiology, helps us explain reproduction, environmental or climate change. It helps us explain everything. And by being able to explain why it is certain things happen or why it is certain trends occur, okay, science allows us to make predictable, okay, decisions for future events. Okay. That's one thing that really separates humans from a lot of other organisms, probably all other organisms, is we have the ability to collect data today and make predictions, logical predictions about what's going to happen in the future. Okay? Most organisms, maybe all other organisms, really don't have that capability. They can't think beyond maybe a couple days, maybe a week. Right? We have the ability to predict what might happen in 50 years, maybe even 100 years. Right? And there's a lot of logic around that. And with more knowledge, with more science being done, the predictions become better and better. Okay? So when it comes to science in general, though, you have to realize that there are lots of predictions. People make predictions all the time. I mean, if we followed predictions of some individuals, the planet would have ended about 100 years ago, right? And then they made another prediction that they were wrong and now it's going to end 50 years ago. And then another prediction 20 years ago. And then another prediction in the year 2000, was the end of the world. And it's come and gone. And these predictions are not based on anything, not based on science whatsoever. Okay? Scientific predictions, okay, sound scientific predictions have really came to fruition and have been, for either for better or worse. Okay? So, like, for example, there was a scientific prediction that was done in the 1960s by an ecologist, okay, named Ederlin, okay, and he predicted that we would hit 7 billion people in 2010. And that was based on the trajectory of the human population. Is based on how many offspring people are, reproducing, and the fact that we have these cycles of war about every 10 years kind of thing, and all this, and he kind of just figured out, roughed out, made a huge equation where he kind of balanced all these things out, and he said 2010. He was right. Okay? We hit 7 billion in 2010. The end of 2010, we creeped over 7 billion. Okay? Now, does that make him a genius? Does that make him special? No, it makes him a scientist, because he approached it by acquiring lots of information and then building giant models to make those predictions. Okay? Now, what happens if just Joe Schmo makes a prediction and it's right? Okay? Then I would consider that individual lucky. There's nothing wrong with being lucky. Okay? But luck and science, now there is a little bit of luck in science, but they play a different role. Okay? Science is developed on accuracy. Okay? So it can happen over and over and over again. Okay? So let me give you a couple examples. Okay? Scientists are normally skeptics, okay? And they try to be unbiased as possible. Now, not all scientists are this way. Okay? Some scientists do have initiatives, okay? But they don't last very long in science. For example, Andrew Wakefield. As some of you probably have heard of Wakefield and MMR, or measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination. Okay? Andrew Wakefield was a doctor, and emphasis on was a doctor. Okay, he was a doctor that did research on measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination, and he linked it to autism. Okay? But let me back up a little bit. Wakefield had an issue with vaccination to begin with. Okay? He wanted to find a link between vaccinations and something bad. Okay? And so he went out looking for it. And so what he would do, and this is part of the reason why he is no longer a doctor, and his medical license was removed, and he was kicked out of the academy, okay, and he's ridiculed by many scientists now. Okay? But he would go to kids' birthday parties, and he would ask around for all the kids that had autism to come see him. and then he would take a little bit of blood from them. Okay? And he was selecting kids that were already autistic. Okay? And then on top of it, he's selecting school-age kids that had to have the measles, mumps, rubella vaccination. And so he was selectively picking out every child who had the vaccination and had autism. And then he was publishing on this. Okay? So we call this cherry picking the data, or selectively biasing your samples. Okay? And so he linked autism to measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination, which there is no link whatsoever. And we now know, after many studies, probably 200 studies after Wakefield's research, and the reason why Wakefield is no longer a doctor and no longer recognized as a true scientist, okay? Although he's still a mouthpiece for the fact that he thinks that vaccinations cause autism, okay? Although there's no evidence except for Wakefield's evidence, and there's hundreds and hundreds of publications that say it's not true, okay? There are still lots of people, okay, that believe Wakefield's research, because he got out there, he got on TV, he got celebrities to follow him, okay? But that's not how science works. And he is no longer a scientist according to the Scientific Academy. Okay? So that's why I bring this up. There are some biased scientists out there. Okay? They have an agenda. But the great thing about science versus a lot of other fields is in every field there are people with agendas. The great thing about science is a lot of those individuals will eventually get skimmed off the top. Okay, we'll figure them out. Okay, a rebuttal will be published, and their science will be debunked. Okay, and they'll go away. Other fields, that's not the case. They can hang around for much, much longer because they don't approach their field in the same manner that science does. Okay. So scientists strive for accuracy, first of all, the correctness of measurements, and being a whole, collecting data on the whole versus cherry picking or biasing your results. The other thing, the main thing, is reproducibility. Okay? Create a experiment that anyone with a scientific background could follow and get the exact same results. This is replication. If that can be done, then you have a lot more validation for your research and a lot more validation for your conclusion. Okay? So this is kind of how the scientific process works. Okay? First of all, you have an observation, a question. Okay? You have to form a hypothesis, which is an explanation for that question. That explanation has to be testable. You design a test, collect the data, analyze the data through statistics and other things, okay, and then report it to a peer-reviewed system, okay, where that information goes to specialists in the field. They review it, make sure that it was sound results, a sound test, and everything like that. And then if that's the case, then you can publish your findings. Okay? This makes science kind of inclusive. So it's not just individuals doing research in their basement and publishing papers. Okay, you have to be a legit scientist, and people who are already legitimate scientists have to be able to review your information before it goes to the public. Okay? Now, if your hypothesis is rejected and your results are poor, then you might come back and test a new hypothesis. Okay? And we'll go through these things in a little while. Okay? Brings me to two types of reasoning. Okay? Deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Most people on an everyday basis do what we call deductive reasoning, which is using general principles to explain events, to explain materials. Okay, so again, gravity. Okay, and so that is, a general principle. It's been discovered for hundreds of years, okay? And it's not likely to change. But if it does change, we have a process by which we can change things like that. Okay? And so we often say that deductive reasoning is using logical reasoning to answer questions. But the logic part comes from pre-existing general principles. Okay? Where do the pre-existing general principles come from? Inductive reasoning. Okay? Inductive reasoning is what most scientists do when they're doing primary research. They're trying to develop a general rule. They're trying to produce the general ideas for individuals to use deductive reasoning. So, we'll talk about in here, we'll talk about germ theory, okay, we'll talk about theory of disease, okay, we'll talk about energetics, we'll talk about photosynthesis. All these things have been discovered a long period of time, okay? And we'll use deductive reasoning to explain what's going on. But I'll also touch on a lot of inductive reasonings, new research, okay, like gene therapy and ability to sequester and utilize bacteria to reduce pollutions and things like this, which is part of inductive reasoning. It's trying to produce a general rule about things that is not known. Okay? Now, again, I don't want to remove the luck portion of research. Of course, there is a luck piece, right? Because a lot of research is done for years and years and years, and nothing comes of it because it was either a poor design, or you're looking at the wrong process, or So a lot of the discoveries that we know today are the result of a little bit of luck. Okay? A faulty system like leaving bread out on the counter, uh, shocking a solution when it shouldn't have been shocked. These kind of things have really given us certain types of antibiotics, certain abilities to create amino acids, these kind of things. Just situations where a mistake was made, okay, but the result was exactly what we're looking for, and that comes with luck. But also, I would say that don't give luck too much credit, because a lot of the role of science really comes with insight and creativity. Okay, so having the insight to test or know that there's an issue, okay, and then being able to create a test, or having a system where you have to create a product to test that question or that phenomena, that's a huge role of scientists. So let's go to hypotheses. Okay, so again, hypothesis is not an educated guess. You've been taught this for a long time, and I wish teachers would stop telling their students that it's an educated guess. Okay? Just because you're an educated individual does not mean that you can create hypotheses. Okay? And it doesn't mean that you can create a valid hypothesis. Remember, a hypothesis is an explanation for a natural phenomena. In order to explain that natural phenomena, you have to have background in that field. Not anyone can come up with a valid hypothesis for why something occurs. Okay? And on top of that, they might be able to come up with a valid hypothesis, but often it's not testable. So that testability really plays a huge role in hypothesis testing, okay, and creation. The other piece that a lot of people, general public, get caught up in is what we call theory. Because scientific theory means something very different than the word theory to the general public. To a scientist, the word theory means that a considerable amount of research has been done on the subject, okay? That it's more than just facts, that it's been confirmed by many, many studies, okay? And it is the accepted explanation for that natural phenomena. Okay? So it's not that it's been proven, right? Because scientists don't prove things. But it is that it's more than just there's data for it. Okay? It is the explanation and has been the explanation for that natural phenomenon for probably a long period of time. Numerous studies. And when I say numerous studies, things don't get elevated from hypothesis to theory with really less than 50 studies. There's no way that that's going to occur. Okay? Most of the time we're talking hundreds of years before it gets elevated from a hypothesis to a theory. Okay? Now to the general public, theory means something very different. It's actually the exact opposite. Often I'll hear students and people just talking and they'll say, I got a theory on that. No, what that means is you got a guess. Okay? You have a guess on that. You didn't develop a theory because you haven't even done the research. And it's not even a hypothesis because most of the time your guess isn't testable. Okay? So a theory to the general public is just a guess or a lack of knowledge. Okay? But the scientific theory means that it's a reliable explanation. It's been tested numerous times, and none of the tests have rejected that explanation for that natural phenomena. Okay. For example, this is a daddy longlegs or Opalones. Okay, is the group that this spider or harvestman belongs to. Okay. And I often get this question from students when I teach insect bio or when I teach general biology or when I just talk to individuals. Okay? I'll often get this question from them and they'll be like, so daddy long legs, you're not going to have us collect them if I'm doing a collection or something like that, or kids, like, I'm not going to touch that. That's the most poisonous spider on the planet. Okay? So I often get this question, what happens, how fast will it kill me if this thing bites me? Okay. Well, from my standpoint, and from the standpoint of the scientists, okay, if you hear that, okay, you would create a hypothesis. You would say, okay, this is my hypothesis. Okay. The hypothesis would be an explanation for the natural phenomenon. Okay. That daddy longlegs, given that people think they're extremely venomous, would have to have fangs and venom sacs in order to be considered a venomous creature. Okay? That's a perfectly good explanation. So for a natural phenomenon. So we can look. So we do a micrograph and electron microscope picture of Opalones or a daddy longleg, and this is what you see. And if you look here in this region, okay, you can see these pedipalps. These are not fangs. These are pedipalps. Okay, and then here you can see that there are no fangs. Now they do have little teeny fangs that are coming off of here and here, but you can't really see them. Okay? And if you take a closer look, there are no venom sacs here or here. Okay? And the fangs that they do have, or the teeth that they have, okay, the chelicerates that they have, do not have hollow tips. So they're not hollow. And they don't have a groove that runs in them. So there's no way that they can actually deposit any venom. As a matter of fact, okay, when you look at the anatomy of this spider, there is no venom. None. They are not the most venomous spider on the planet. They are not even a spider, for that matter. Okay? They're in their own group called harvestmen. Okay? They have no venom. They don't have the ability to develop venom or anything like that. Okay? So, but it takes science to get rid of that. Now, just to support that fact, we can look at something like a, black widow. Okay? Here you can see there's those pedipalps again, but here you can see these fangs. Okay? And these pieces behind the fangs are venom sacs. Okay? And and this is a venomous spider. Okay? And so by just testing things versus taking things for granted, okay, you can learn a lot about the world, and you can stop being afraid of things like daddy long legs, and that fear should go away. Okay? But this is the case with a lot of things in science, okay? Is people will develop a, well, my grandma told me, or my elementary school teacher told me, or, someone told me along the line. But the issue mainly is a scientist never told you that. And people make things up all the time. Okay? And in this case, it is the role of science to educate the general public so they stop squishing every daddy long leg they see, or stop thinking that the climate is not changing. We have the temperature profiles that show the temperature is increasing, and scientists are not making this up. Okay? They're not making graphs to show the temperature increasing. Okay? Their instruments are calculating that the temperature is increasing. Now, they may make hypotheses for why that temperature is increasing, and support that with evidence of carbon dioxide increases, okay, the increases amount of pavement and non-absorptive structures like buildings and things like that reflect heat back. Okay? There's a lot of research out there that suggests that's why a lot of cities or temperatures are much hotter than the outside environment, is because the city's built out of structures that can't absorb the heat and just reflect the heat. Okay? But nonetheless, okay, we need, as people who are trying to educate themselves, okay, start taking individuals who are professionals in the field seriously, okay, instead of individuals who just have TV time, have a blog, or people that you just meet on the street. Okay? I mean, I'll be willing to bet you go and ask 100 people what the most dangerous spider is on the planet, they're going to say daddy long leg. Okay? And it's because of this wives' tale that's been passed on and on and on when they actually have no venom. Okay, that brings me to the last piece, and that's probability. Okay, and we'll get into this because we're going to start talking about statistics. Because it's not just enough to create a hypothesis, create a good test, but now when you have all the data, what are you going to do with it? Okay? And so often we'll do something to test the probability that your data is supporting your hypothesis, or that your data is sound. Okay, and that is, the probability is really how likely can you get this data to be repeatable. Okay? So if you do the study and you have a 95% confidence, that means that you 95% of the time you're going to get the same results. You have 5% error. So if you did the experiment 100 times, 95 times you're going to get the exact same result. 5 times you're going to get something weird. Okay? As biologists and environmental scientists and natural resource manager, okay, that's what we shoot for, is that 95% confidence. Now, sometimes, though, we have the ability to increase the level of confidence, okay, by trying to eliminate things that might hamper the study. Okay, so a very well developed study might be, so let's say we're trying to look at climate change, or look at the role that carbon dioxide plays in warming the planet. Well, we could do this on a broad scheme, okay? And so we look at, maybe just one area, okay, in the United States. Maybe we take the state of Kansas and we look at carbon dioxide levels and temperature, and we compare the two and we correlate the two together. Okay? But there's so many other variables. Okay? Wind speed, okay, you got cloud cover, you have what's the habitat type, how many trees do you have, what's the soil, Okay, what color is the soil? How many cars are there? How many people are there? Blah, 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 blah. So instead, what a scientist might do at first is say, hey, let's bring this into the lab and do it in a closed chamber where we, as a scientist, can dictate what goes in, what comes out, okay? And we can increase the carbon dioxide level without changing any of the other variables, without, you know, having to account for the number of people or soil type or the plants or anything, wind speed and things like that. So then we can see the direct effect. Okay? Then your confidence interval goes up. Okay? Then you can expand that and you can move it out. And that's what a lot of scientists are doing, okay, is expanding their laboratory research to the field. Okay? All right, so with that, we'll come back to statistical testing, okay, and analyzing data next time.